two nations tied by ancient memory and modern isolation once found themselves aligned in secret. From oil pipelines to missile prototypes, from drip irrigation to special forces, Iran and Israel spent 3 decades building a partnership hidden from the world. It was pragmatic, not sentimental, built on mutual enemies, shared insecurity, and a desire to outmaneuver the Arab world. But what began as silent cooperation would end in public rupture, and a legacy both nations still struggle to speak aloud. We'll have to hear it from the machine. Be you informed, not judgmental.
Welcome to a really unexpected chapter of modern Middle Eastern history. We're talking about the complex alliance that existed between Iran and Israel.
Yeah, a hidden relationship.
We're covering the period from Israel's establishment in 1948 all the way up to, well, the dramatic upheaval of the Iranian Revolution in 1979.
It's a period often overlooked, definitely overshadowed by the open hostility we see between the two nations today. But, it holds insights into the region's dynamics and, frankly, how much things can change.
Exactly. And for this, we've gone through a stack of source materials you've provided, articles, research papers, historical documents, all shedding light on this specific era.
Right. And these sources give us a window into a relationship that went far beyond just, simple diplomacy. It touched on strategic alignment, deep intelligence and military ties, and even, surprisingly, extensive economic and civil cooperation.
So our mission, find those really important nuggets of knowledge and insight so you can become well-informed on this intricate, often hidden relationship.
Think of it as a journey, maybe, through layers of history. We're uncovering facts and trying to understand the very pragmatic, sometimes cold, strategic calculations that underpin this seemingly unlikely partnership.
We're going to explore how this relationship even started, how the intelligence and military ties became incredibly deep, some frankly surprising joint projects in economic and civil development, a particularly crucial piece of infrastructure, the Eilat-Ashkelon oil pipeline, and how the Shah of Iran tried, well, desperately, to keep all of this hidden from his own people and the wider Arab world.
It's a fascinating case study in realpolitik, isn't it?
Right.
Where perceived national interest just took precedence over ideological or religious differences, at least for a time.
What was really going on behind the scenes between Tehran and Tel Aviv for over 3 decades.
Right, let's begin at the very start, post-1948. Looking at it now, it seems, well, almost incredible that a relationship could have even begun.
Yeah, the sources show that initially Iran's public stance on the creation of Israel was, well, pretty firmly aligned with the Arab and Islamic consensus of the time. In the 1947 UN deliberations over Palestine, Iran voted against the partition plan. That was the outward face,
Definitely the public position. Taken to preserve Iran's standing, avoid immediate regional backlash.
But even then, at that very early stage, there were these subtle hints of something more nuanced. The sources mention Iran's delegate to the UN, Nasrullah Enetazim. He reportedly held private sympathies with Zionist aspirations.
Which suggests, not everyone at the official level necessarily shared that public opposition. Maybe a crack of daylight there.
And after Israel's declaration of independence and the 1948 war, Iran outwardly kept supporting the Arab side. They even send ambulances for wounded Arab fighters. Again, this seems like managing appearances, regional relationships.
But pragmatic considerations were already in play, even then. The sources note that later in 1948, Israel actually made a goodwill gesture. They offered restitution and repatriation to some Iranian nationals, mostly Baha'is and Jews, who'd been displaced during the conflict.
That's interesting. A small thing, maybe, but significant, hinting at quiet ties forming despite the public posture.
Exactly. And that quiet diplomacy led to a really major step relatively quickly. March 6, 1950, Iran became the second Muslim-majority country after Turkey to grant de facto recognition to Israel.
Okay, de facto, that's key. Not full formal recognition.
Right. No exchange of accredited ambassadors, no official embassies with flags flying. But it did allow for limited functional official contact. It opened the door for diplomatic and, importantly, economic interactions. Very functional.
And Iran insisted on keeping it low profile.
Very much so. The sources note Israel's mission in Tehran was deliberately kept small. The Israeli envoy held a rank below ambassador, and the mission was called a delegation or legation, definitely not an embassy.
And Iran did the same in Israel.
Yep. Mirrored it. No credited ambassador. Their representative, Reza Safinia, was a minister plenipotentiary. He hosted Israeli leaders like Ben-Gurion, but at informal, very discreet gatherings. There's a picture mentioned in the sources. It just shows how deliberately semi-covert these ties were from day one.
The Shah's government must have been acutely aware of the potential backlash.
Domestically and from Arab neighbors. And domestic backlash did appear. The sources highlight vocal opposition from influential clerics like Ayatollah Abul Qasim Kashani. He really denounced the recognition.
How strongly?
Well, he reportedly viewed Israel as a colonial project, even declared fighting the Jews as compulsory. Quite fiery.
Wow. So that kind of pressure had an effect.
It did, especially under Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh from 51 to 53. Iran's initial goodwill cooled. Mossadegh withdrew Iran's envoy from Tel Aviv in 1951, downgrading the relationship further.
But he didn't revoke the recognition entirely.
No, the sources emphasize that. The de facto recognition was never formally revoked by Mossadegh. The channel, however minimal, remained.
Then came the turning point, the 1953 coup restoring the Shah's power.
Exactly. Iran deepened its alignment with the West, and the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, started seeing Israel differently. He began to quietly revive and build upon those earlier discrete ties.
And his perspective was purely strategic.
Intensely pragmatic, yes. Driven by strategic interests, not ideology. The sources point to several key motives for the Shah engaging with Israel after 53.
Like the fear of Nasser, pan-Arabism.
That was primary. A 1968 CIA assessment cited in the sources talks about the Shah's deep-seated fear of revolutionary Arab nationalism championed by Nasser.
He was worried Nasser could stir up trouble.
Yes, worried he might incite Iran's own Arab minority in Khuzestan, the oil region, or challenge Iran's leadership ambitions in the Gulf. A covert alliance with Israel offered a partner against these radical Arab regimes, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, who were hostile to both of them.
A classic enemy of my enemy situation.
Precisely. And the Cold War context was huge. Both Iran and Israel were firmly in the Western camp, aligned with the U.S. The Shah saw Israel as a critical bulwark against Soviet communism creeping into the Middle East. Cooperation strengthened the U.S.-led regional order.
And he was impressed by Israeli expertise.
Genuinely, technical and military expertise. The sources give a great example. After a massive earthquake in Qazvin in 1962, the Shah quietly welcomed Israeli water engineers to help rebuild. He valued Israel's advanced know-how in agriculture, water management, things Iran really needed.
There was also a political angle regarding Washington.
Definitely, a calculated one. The Shah knew about Israel's close relationship with the United States, the influence of the American Jewish community. He believed cultivating ties with Israel could maybe enhance Iran's standing, win favor with his superpower patron.
Did that play out directly?
Sometimes. Israeli envoys occasionally advised Iran on lobbying for U.S. aid, and Iran, in turn, could give Israel introductions in non-Arab Asia or Islamic organizations where Israel had, let's say, limited access. A sort of triangular logic.
And this all fit perfectly with Israel's own strategy at the time, the periphery doctrine.
Indeed. Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion's strategy. Forge alliances with non-Arab states on the geographical fringes, Turkey, Iran, Ethiopia, to break Israel's regional isolation and counter Arab power.
And that doctrine led to something significant and secret in 1958.
Yes, the formation of a trilateral intelligence alliance, codenamed Trident, Israel, Iran, and Turkey.
Trident. Okay, so this was formal but secret.
Deeply clandestine, but yes, a formal arrangement. It set up a framework for regular intelligence sharing, coordination between these three non-Arab pro-Western powers.
And within Trident, Mossad and SAVAK got particularly close.
Especially close. SAVAK, Iran's secret police, was created in '57, initially with CIA help, but soon after Mossad became a primary partner in its development and training.
How close are we talking?
Well, the sources detail joint intelligence summits reportedly held twice a year, and intelligence exchanges happening almost daily between Mossad and SAVAK under the Trident framework. Secrecy was paramount, obviously. Lots of third-party venues, cutouts for meetings.
So by the early 60s, Israel has this permanent delegation in Tehran. Looks like a trade office, but acts like an embassy.
A de facto embassy, exactly.
Yeah.
Without the formal titles or flags, but functionally, yes.
And the 1960s saw this clandestine friendship just solidify further.
Driven by those persistent, pragmatic state interests, it became deeper, more operational.
There was that incident in 1960, Nasser breaking ties with Iran.
Yes, specifically to protest the Shah's ongoing ties with Israel. And the Shah's response, recorded in the sources, was pure realpolitik. He publicly declared there was no contradiction between Iran supporting Arab states and having economic links to Israel. National interest first.
And large-scale joint projects started quietly then.
And a major test and opportunity came after the 1967 Six-Day War. Iran was officially neutral, but Tehran played a role afterwards.
ensuring Israel's energy security.
Exactly. Iran became a significant supplier of Israel's oil, especially as Arab states impose embargoes. This vital oil relationship led directly to planning and building the Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline, that secret joint venture we mentioned. We'll get into that more.
And trade beyond oil was booming too.
It was. Israeli firms undertook development projects in Iran. Iran got Israeli expertise, especially in agriculture and water.
Even El Al, Israel's airline, flew to Tehran.
Regularly, though discreetly. Remarkable, really, given Iran's official position on Palestine.
So by the end of the 60s, it's a working alliance in all but name. Commerce, oil, intelligence, despite no formal recognition.
A clear triumph of realpolitik over ideology in the Cold War Middle East.
All right, let's pause here for a quick recap. We've seen how Iran's initial public stance against Israel, voting against partition, eventually gave way to quiet de facto recognition in 1950.
Driven largely by shared fears, specifically of Nasserite pan-Arabism and Soviet influence spreading in the region.
Which perfectly aligned with Israel's periphery doctrine, leading to that secret Trident intelligence alliance with Turkey in 1958.
Focusing on intelligence sharing and coordination.
And by the 1960s, this evolved into a real working alliance covering trade, vital oil supplies, and deep intelligence cooperation, all happening despite the lack of formal diplomatic ties. It was pragmatism winning out. Okay, here's a review question for you listening. Which two major geopolitical threats did Iran and Israel primarily align against in the early years of their secret partnership?
The answer, thinking back, is Nasserite pan-Arabism and Soviet influence or expansion in the Middle East.
Good. Now repeat this for retention. Shared adversaries make unlikely friends.
Shared adversaries make unlikely friends.
So to mega recap this first chapter,
Iran moved from publicly opposing Israel to granting that de facto recognition in 1950, though it was always maintained discreetly.
The alliance was strategically motivated by those mutual fears, Nasserite pan-Arabism and Soviet expansion.
Israel's periphery doctrine led to the secret Trident alliance with Iran and Turkey for intelligence sharing.
And by the 1960s, the relationship was a practical working alliance in trade, oil, and intelligence, despite no formal ties, a clear case of realpolitik. Type continue for further detail.
Now we get into the really shadowy stuff, the intelligence and military collaboration. The sources indicate this became incredibly extensive for both sides.
Right, moving beyond the foundations into the operational core of the alliance.
These intelligence and military ties were perhaps the most sensitive, the most deeply intertwined aspects of this secret alliance. We're talking operations at the highest levels of government, the security establishments.
Let's start with the intelligence partnership, Mossad and SAVAK. We mentioned SAVAK's creation in '57. Mossad quickly became a key partner.
One of its closest foreign partners, yes. While the CIA and MI6 helped initially by the early 60s, Iran specifically sought out Israel for more advanced expertise, especially after American advisors sort of scaled back.
And that Israeli delegation, the quasi-embassy in Tehran, was central, having Yaakov Nimrodi there.
He was the liaison, yes.
Yeah.
That presence was fundamental. Mossad directly helped SAVAK set up its own internal intelligence training unit. And starting in the 60s, groups of SAVAK recruits were regularly sent to Israel for extensive training.
Extensive how?
We're talking periods lasting up to 1 or 2 years. That really speaks volumes about the depth of the commitment, the trust involved.
And the quality of the training.
Accounts from former SAVAK officers, quoted in the sources, apparently called it the best training they had ever received. High praise.
And Israeli instructors were also working in Iran.
Providing ongoing training for SAVAK cadres right there on Iranian soil. This deep institutional link, Mossad trainers embedded in SAVAK, a Mossad station in Tehran working closely with counterparts that formed the absolute backbone of the secret intelligence alliance.
Built on shared tradecraft, joint ops, and those shared threats.
Exactly. Shared strategic targets were clear from the get-go. Both agencies fiercely anti-communist, deeply concerned about radical Arab nationalism, especially Nasser's pan-Arab.
And they coordinated actions, not just shared intel.
Oh yes. Sources note joint intelligence meetings starting late 50s under Trident, where Israeli, Iranian, and Turkish spy chiefs explicitly planned subversion projects directed against Nasserist and Soviet regional influence.
So actively undermining perceived threats. Iran and Israel shared intel on hostile Arab leaders, communist activities, which helped SAVAK monitor Nasser's plots against the Shah.
And keep tabs on Soviet-backed groups nearby. Arab radicalism and Soviet meddling were seen as intertwined threats during the Cold War. Israeli intelligence regularly gave the Shah early warnings analyses of Nasser's moves, Moscow's regional plays, advance notice.
And SAVAK gave Mossad insights into Arab states.
It's unique, on-the-ground intelligence about neighboring Arab states, the Gulf region. Places Israel had limited collection capabilities. It was reciprocal.
And all kept incredibly secret.
Meticulously. Sources emphasize both governments knew they had to withhold it from other allies, sometimes even from the U.S., and deny everything if exposed. Plausible deniability was key.
A major focus was countering communist subversion, given the Soviet border and Israel's concerns.
Strategically vital for both. Mossad's training for SAVAK heavily emphasized counterintelligence against Soviet intel services, teaching SAVAK about KGB structure, tactics, Marxist ideology, communist parties in the region.
Mossad shared profiles on communist groups, advised on monitoring Soviet aid to radical regimes like Iraq.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By the late 50s, SAVAK reports warned Iraqi and Iranian communists might use Iraq as a base to subvert Iran. Mossad's expertise helped SAVAK foil those plots.
And technology played a role. Surveillance gear.
Significant role. Israel provided SAVAK's tech directorate with advanced surveillance equipment, eavesdropping devices, sophisticated photo reconnaissance gear, and trained their technicians.
Boosting Iran's capacity to find communist cells.
Definitely. And in return, SAVAK gave Mossad valuable intel on leftist networks in Arab countries, Persian Gulf states, areas hard for Israel to penetrate. They were each other's eyes and ears against Soviet-aligned elements. Beyond communism, the immediate threat was Nasserism, Arab nationalism.
Right, that directly threatened both the Shah and Israel. Sources say they worked hand in glove to counter it.
Closely tracking Nasser's efforts in the 60s to export revolution, undermine conservative monarchies. Monitoring Egyptian propaganda inciting unrest in the Gulf. Cairo's support for insurgents in Yemen, Oman.
Israeli intelligence briefed the Shah on hostile Arab rhetoric, military plans.
Regularly. A declassified CIA memo from the 70s, cited in the sources, confirms Israel and Iran shared a fear of the emergence of Arab power and actively cooperated to blunt Soviet-armed Arab regimes.
And they ran joint operations to subvert Nasser's influence, propaganda, political warfare.
That's what the sources suggest, under the Trident umbrella. SAVAK reports showed deep alarm at Egypt's meddling in Iraq, a shared rival. Mossad helped Iran keep a close watch on Soviet aid entering Iraq that could bolster Baghdad. Opposing Nasser was a core unifying objective.
Okay, maybe the most remarkable example of this collaboration. Jointly backing Kurdish rebels in northern Iraq.
This is where the covert action becomes incredibly detailed, really integrated, supporting Mullah Mustafa Barzani's Kurdish insurgency. The goal:
tie down the Iraqi army, weaken a powerful Arab adversary, a mutual rival.
Precisely. Sources state this started discreetly in 1963. Ben-Gurion authorized Mossad to aid Barzani, explicitly coordinated with SAVAK.
A Mossad emissary met Barzani in Iraqi Kurdistan.
May 1963. Soon after, Mossad chief Mir Amit and SAVAK Director General Hassan Pakrovan formalized the strategy.
And the goal wasn't necessarily an independent Kurdistan.
No. Both Iran and Turkey feared that could destabilize their own Kurdish populations. The goal, sources say, was to keep the rebellion simmering, the coals burning, without letting them burst into flames, specifically to bog down Iraq's military, distract Baghdad.
And Israel delivered arms via Iran.
Late 1963. Carefully selected Soviet-made weapons, acquired elsewhere, to maintain deniability, make it look like the Kurds got them from someone else.
By 65, it was a full-blown operation. SAVAK escorting Israel's IDF chief of staff into Kurdistan.
Yes, cool. Pageman escorting Sivitzer to meet Barzani. That visit cemented the partnership on the ground. Israel then established a permanent Mossadi IDF team at Barzani's HQ with SAVAK's assent.
And their support was comprehensive. Arms, training, funding.
Even helped the Kurds create their own intelligence service, Peristin, to spy on the Iraqi army. Mossad and SAVAK trained Kurdish fighters, intel operatives, sometimes on Iranian soil, set up joint intel centers along the Iran-Iraq border.
Israeli and Iranian instructors training Kurdish units, sometimes with Turkish liaison.
Israel provided a radio relay team for direct communication with Mossad in Tel Aviv, a full-field hospital with Israeli medics for the Peshmerga. Israeli military advisors assigned a Kurdish command.
And the funding.
Israel gave Barzani a stipend, maybe $50,000 monthly. The Shah funneled heavier weapons, significant additional funding. This operation really shows the depth of Mossad-SAVAK cooperation.
Even U.S. officials noted it was working, keeping Iraq's army tied down.
It did, according to the sources, even though Washington officially disapproved. The campaign only stopped abruptly when Iran signed the 1975 Algiers Accord with Iraq.
which required Iran to withdraw support for the Kurds. Israel saw that as a betrayal.
Reportedly, yes. It ended that specific joint operation suddenly.
So overall, the Mossad-SAVAK relationship, by the 70s, it was SAVAK's closest foreign partnership.
Closer than with the CIA or MI6, according to the sources. Regular liaison meetings in Tehran, Tel Aviv. Joint intel stations targeting common adversaries. Sharing nearly real-time intel on Arab military moves.
U.S. scholarly analysis confirms this. SAVAK's closest ties were with Mossad and the CIA.
Yes. And former SAVAK officials confirmed Israeli advisors were deeply involved in reorganizing SAVAK, building on initial CIA foundations.
And much of SAVAK's surveillance tech came from Israel. Eavesdropping gear, photo reconnaissance.
Acquired through Israel, which had advanced capabilities. Mossad helped SAVAK set up its special research unit, the 9th Bureau, providing technical manuals.
They also coordinated in third countries, Lebanon, the Gulf, against Palestinian groups, pro-Nasser factions.
Yes. Yossi Alfer, a former Mossad officer cited, confirmed Israeli officers were training Iranian intel and special forces by the late 60s, and mentioned joint assistance for Iraqi Jews escaping via Kurdistan, another quiet layer.
So, overall, 1957-1979, this partnership was fundamental, described as one of Israel's most far-reaching and comprehensive foreign policy accomplishments.
Giving Israel strategic depth, bolstering the Shah against adversaries. A declassified 1979 CIA review summed it up. Israel got a non-Arab ally, vital oil. Iran got Israeli tech assistance, intel know-how.
Acting in concert against Nasserism, communism, Ba'athist Iraq.
Until the fall of the Shah in 1979 severed it all. Expelled Israelis overnight, Mossad closed its station. Decades of secret cooperation just...
Now, moving from intelligence to the military domain, Israel was also a significant secret partner in building Iran's military.
Significant, yes. While the US and UK were the primary suppliers, Israel quietly provided weapons, training, even joint development projects.
Using barter, third parties for deniability, but the deals are documented.
Reliable sources, declassified US intel, memoirs, they document major transactions. It was driven by complementary needs. Iran had oil wealth, wanted weapons. Israel needed funding for its defense industry, a market for its arms, and crucially, Iranian oil.
A CIA account said Israel regularly sold armaments to Iran, boosting Israel's defense industries, often getting oil in barter.
Exactly. Let's look at specific examples.
Like the Uzi submachine guns.
A well-known early example. Shah's military. Police bought large quantities in the 60s. Thousands imported. By the 70s, Uzis were standard issue for Iranian special forces. Imperial Guard. Confirmed by photos, journalism. Marked the start of Israeli light arms flow.
But the most ambitious project, Project Flower, mid-70s.
Secret. Cutting-edge joint weapons development. One of 6 secret oil for arms contracts. Iran gave oil for advanced Israeli weapons tech.
Israel's defense ministry and Iran's arms chief, General Tufanian, partnered to develop new surface-to-surface missiles.
Including a long-range version of the Israeli Gabriel anti-ship missile. Sources even note the potential for a nuclear warhead capability. High stakes.
Israeli Defense Minister Weissman and Foreign Minister Dayan hosted Tufanian in Israel in '77 to sign the secret deals.
Yes. The Shah committed around $1 billion financed via oil shipments to fund Israeli R&D for these missiles. Iranian engineers joined Israeli experts to build a missile assembly plant near Sirjan in Iran, a test range at Rafsanjan.
By mid-78, Iran had delivered $280 million in oil. Work was underway on prototypes, 300-mile range, 750-kilogram payload.
That's the estimate. And Israeli officials later acknowledged how critical this Iranian funding was, saying, without the ties with Iran, Israel would not have had the money to develop certain cutting-edge weapons.
But Project Flower also ended abruptly with the '79 revolution, before missiles were operational.
Yes, but it's verified proof of the extraordinary level of military-industrial cooperation they were pursuing.
And besides Uzis and Project Flower, other Israeli weapons went to Iran.
Variety through the 60s, 70s. Reports mention 45,000 Uzis total, anti-tank missile launchers, other missiles, howitzers, even spare parts for Iran's American F-4 Phantoms in the early 70s.
These deliveries often acknowledged later during Iran-Iraq war investigations, but originated pre-'79.
Exactly. The Shah's military also got Israeli electronic surveillance gear, signal intercept equipment, night vision optics tech not always easily available from the West.
Israel Aircraft Industries considered selling the Kafir fighter jet.
They did, but Iran bought U.S. F-14s instead. No evidence Kafirs were delivered pre-'79. Israeli military industries helped Iran set up domestic and small arms production lines. technicians in Iran helping manufacture ordnance.
An Israeli general said, every spare moment, Israeli delegations were in Tehran negotiating arms training.
Shows the intensity. By the Shah's final years, Iran was a quiet financial backer for Israel's defense sector, oil for arms. Israel was an alternative source of high-tech weaponry for Iran.
And hardware came with advisors, instructors, tech experts, often undercover.
Deeply embedded. The first defense envoy, Kurdon Yaakov Nimrodi, military attaché in Tehran 6069, fluent Persian, intel vet.
He brokered early arms deals, advised Iranian ground forces, helped arrange that 66 Iraqi MiG-21 defection to Israel.
Yes, Operation Diamond.
Iran's territory and intel were discreetly involved. Nimrodi later recalled inking defense deals, liaising with Shah's generals, facilitating training.
Like Iranian artillery armor officers training in Israel on desert warfare, and Israeli advisors in Iran helping establish elite units. Israeli special forces instructors secretly trained Iranian commandos in counterinsurgency, supplementing U.S.-British training.
Israeli pilots advised the Iranian Air Force on tactics against Soviet MiGs, based on Israel's combat experience.
Highly valued input alongside the main U.S. training.
And joint training exercises, always covert.
Like during the Kurdish operation, Israeli doctors trained Iranian medics in battlefield triage. Intel personnel trained in Israel. Evidence Iranian naval officers observed Israeli Navy exercises in the Red Sea in the 70s.
Part of building Iran's Indian Ocean capacity, which also suited Israel.
An Israeli armor team visited Iranian divisions in 77 to consult on tank tactics against the Soviet T-72 threat in Iraq.
High-level defense consultations were frequent. Shimon Peres making secret trips to Tehran mid-70s.
Conferring with Shah's planners, discussing coordination versus Soviet threats, lessons from the 73 war. By the late 70s, Israelis were integrated into defense projects. Engineers in Iran for Project Flower. Tech teams advising on border radar, weapons modernization.
Strategically, they saw each other as partners in containing threats. Joint committees on Gulf security.
Discussing oil flow, shipping lanes versus Soviet expansion, Arab radicalism, Iran's 1975 intervention in Oman's Doha rebellion against insurgents. Quietly cheered by Israel, who reportedly provided some intel support.
Trident alliance meetings continued. Israel marketed Trident to Washington as an asset to the West.
Exchanging data on Soviet deployments, Arab troop movements, rumors of Israeli listening posts in Iran for Soviet missile tests, sharing intel, though confirmation is scant.
What is confirmed is Israeli tech experts helped Iran set up electronic surveillance on its western border versus Iraq-Syria.
Significantly bolstering Iran's defense posture. By 77, Israel saw Iran as a cornerstone of its security perimeter. Iran benefited from Israeli advice on its own military-industrial complex helicopter missile manufacture.
That 79 CIA memo summarized it. Israel got oil for arms tech, helped Iran support Kurdish rebels. Iran gave Mossad intel on Iraq.
Explicit acknowledgement of the extensive strategic cooperation.
So, summary. Extensive, mutually beneficial, shadowed ties. Iran got weapons training. Israel got oil, defense market, friendly flank. Did business on a stunning scale.
By 78, Iran supplied maybe 70% of Israel's oil. Israel, a key behind-scenes arms supplier. Israeli advisors in Iran showed deep trust, a reality documented, highlighting the dramatic shift post-79 when secret friendship became open enmity. But for decades, intelligence and military establishments cooperated at the highest levels.
All right, let's take another moment here. We've covered a lot of ground in the intelligence and military sphere. We talked about the deep intel ties, Mossad training SAVAK, sharing targets like communism and Nasserism, and that really detailed joint operation supporting the Kurds in Iraq.
A very significant collaboration.
And then the secret military side, from Uzi sales all the way up to that ambitious Project Flower missile development, plus Israeli advisors actually embedded within Iran's forces.
Okay, review question time. Can you name one specific example of a joint Israeli-Iranian intelligence or military project we just discussed, and why it was kept so secret? Well, backing the Kurdish insurgency in Iraq is a prime example. It was kept secret because both Iran and Israel were actively undermining a sovereign neighbor, Iraq, and supporting a separatist group, something neither wanted publicly known, especially Iran given its own Kurdish population and relations with Turkey. Project Flower, the missile project, is another good one. Highly sensitive military tech development kept secret for obvious strategic reasons and to avoid regional escalation.
Excellent. Remember this for retention. The shadow world of spies and soldiers was a bridge between these two nations.
The shadow world of spies and soldiers was a bridge between these two nations.
Let's do the mega recap for this section.
Mossad played a key role in training SAVAK agents, both in Israel and Iran, creating a deep institutional link.
Intel cooperation targeted shared threats: communist subversion, radical Arab nationalism, and hostile neighbors like Ba'athist Iraq.
A major joint operation involved covert support training and arms for the Kurdish insurgency in northern Iraq to weaken Iraq.
Israel was a secret supplier of military hardware, from Uzis to advanced missile tech under Project Flower.
Israeli military advisors and technical experts were embedded in Iran's armed forces, providing training and consultation.
These extensive intelligence and military ties were mutually beneficial, carefully hidden, and only ended with the 1979 revolution. Type continue for further detail. Okay, so moving beyond the strategic world of spies and soldiers, this also reveals some, well, really surprising layers of civil and economic interdependence between Iran and Israel during the Pahlavi era.
It wasn't just about security. The sources highlight a close partnership that fostered numerous civilian development projects throughout this period, 48 to 79.
And this was part of Israel's periphery strategy too, using technical expertise, economic ties to build relationships with non-Arab states.
Very much so. This cooperation spanned diverse sectors: agriculture, water management, energy infrastructure, and industrial development. It was about building broader ties.
And the Shah's government, despite needing to keep things quiet publicly, saw Israel as a valuable partner for modernizing Iran's economy.
Genuinely, they recognized Israel's advanced expertise in key areas, particularly things suited to arid environments, which Iran needed for its development goals.
And for Israel, Iran was a key ally, a source of oil, a market for expertise,
and a partner for regional projects. This underlying political understanding and mutual benefit paved the way for numerous agreements, enabling extensive development cooperation alongside the strategic deals.
Let's start with agriculture and irrigation. Sources say this was a cornerstone.
The cornerstone, yes. Israel was becoming a world leader in arid land farming, efficient irrigation, highly relevant to Iran. They shared this know-how to boost Iran's agricultural output, modernize farming.
So Israeli agricultural experts went to Iran, introduced modern techniques, water-saving systems.
Yes, advisors on the ground. And it went further. In the 60s and 70s, Israel's International Development Agency, Mossad, organized dedicated training programs. Iranian agronomists, farmers traveled to Israel for intensive 6-week courses.
Wow, what did they learn?
Practical hands-on skills, modern irrigation management, optimized cultivation for crops like cotton, efficient poultry and dairy farming, proper use of fertilizers.
And Israel introduced drip irrigation technology.
That was a notable contribution, highlighted in the sources, cutting edge at the time, drastically cut water use, improved crop yields. For Iran,
They also advised on crop diversification, cotton, sugar beet, helping Iran become self-sufficient, even export.
exactly, increased harvests significantly due to these techniques and planning advice.
There's a prominent example mentioned, the Qazvin Area Development Project, after that big earthquake in '62.
A very well-documented case. The Shah's Plan Organization invited the Israeli government-owned firm Tahal experts in water planning and regional development to help rebuild and modernize the whole Qazvin region.
So an Israeli team went in, architects, engineers, agricultural experts.
A large multidisciplinary team led by Aria Lova Eliav, under a contract signed January '63, working directly under Iran's Ministry of Agriculture.
What do they do? Rebuild villages?
Planned and oversaw rebuilding destroyed villages, yes, but also formulated a comprehensive 6-year development master plan for the region, introducing new crops, setting up demonstration farms, training Iranian engineers on site, aimed at boosting productivity, living standards.
So Qazvin became a model of Israeli-Iranian cooperation in regional planning, showcasing Israeli technical depth.
Exactly. From agronomy to civil engineering.
And Israel's expertise in water management was used more broadly, beyond agriculture.
Widely applied. Throughout the 70s, Iranian authorities contracted Israeli companies, especially Tahal, famous for Israel's own national water carrier, to design and install critical urban water and sewage systems.
Like in Tehran, Tahal planned the entire sewage system.
Planned and implemented it in the 1970s, a massive undertaking. And remarkably, sources mention that decades later, after the revolution, Iranian officials reportedly sought clandestine access to those original Israeli blueprints.
Really? Shows the quality of the work, I guess.
A testament to the enduring value, yes. Similarly, Tahal and others built water and sewage systems in Isfahan, Bandar Abbas, equipping major cities.
And in Hamadan and Kermanshah. Household water delivery irrigation networks, many still operational today.
That's what the sources indicate, which highlights a concrete legacy, but also post-79 challenges. Iran reportedly had to get spare parts manuals through third parties in Europe to maintain these Israeli-built systems.
Israel also helped with water technology, drilling, desalination.
Mekorot, Israel's national water company, did exploratory drilling for fresh water across Iran, managed the large water project on the Caspian shores, and IDE, Israel Desalination Engineering, installed small-scale desalination units.
Dozens of sites, including Air Force bases.
36 portable plants on Iranian Air Force bases, 19 others for civilian use in the 70s. Clearly shows how Israeli know-how helped Iran's development goals, improving drinking water, supporting arid agriculture, water self-sufficiency. Beyond water and agriculture, cooperation extended to industrial planning, construction, broader economic development.
During the Shah's White Revolution modernization push, he welcomed Israeli technical advisors.
Quietly, yes. Experts from Israeli planning agencies contributed to regional projects like Kozvin, but also advised on broader initiatives, integrating agriculture with infrastructure, land use planning.
Leading to technical exchange. Iranian planners working alongside Israelis, gaining skills.
A significant people-to-people exchange created a cohort of Iranian professionals trained by Israelis. Quite striking, given the later enmity.
And Israeli firms participated in Iran's construction boom. Solel Boneh,
Prominent Israeli construction company, undertook high-profile projects in the 70s, notably built the Tehran Hilton Hotel, a landmark. Also large housing complexes, including one for U.S. military personnel stationed there.
built hundreds of units, required industrial planning expertise.
Where Israeli contractors had substantial experience. Israeli electrical and mechanical engineers also involved in setting up industrial plants, utilities, often supplying machinery, tech equipment Iran needed.
So Iran became a major customer for Israeli industrial goods. Electrical equipment, chemicals, pumps, machinery, fueling development program.
Exactly, a significant trade relationship in the civilian sector too.
And all this was underpinned by high-level agreements, made discreetly.
Political and economic agreements. That de facto recognition in 50, the unofficial mission in Tehran, led by diplomats like Mir Ezri, provided the channel.
Facilitating MOUs on agriculture, health, commercial contracts for infrastructure, long-term oil for goods deals.
Yes, and a linchpin was that arrangement. Iran supplied Israel with crude oil, becoming its primary source. Israel provided military hardware, training, and this development expertise in return.
Annual trade in the 70s reached hundreds of millions, covering oil, arms, and civilian sectors.
A truly mutually beneficial economic exchange. It effectively bankrolled many of these joint ventures. This strategic economic symbiosis, often kept semi-secret, enabled the success and scale.
Until the late 70s unraveling, the 79 revolutions severed relations, froze projects.
Immediately. Israeli experts, engineers had to leave hurriedly. Decades of cooperation officially erased. Though, as sources note, the physical infrastructure often remained, sometimes quietly maintained by Iran afterwards.
Shows how dependent these pragmatic ties were on the Shah's regime. Let's recap. We explored the extensive economic and civil ties from Israeli experts transforming Iranian agriculture with techniques like drip irrigation,
To rebuilding entire regions after earthquakes, like the Kozvin project.
building major urban infrastructure, think Tehran's sewage system planned by an Israeli firm,
And Israeli companies contributing significantly to Iran's industrial and construction boom, like building the Tehran Hilton.
All right, here's your review question. The Kozvin Area Development Project was a key example of Israeli-Iranian civilian cooperation. Which specific Israeli firm led this project, and what types of expertise did their team bring?
The firm was Tahal, Water Planning Ltd., and the team brought a wide range of expertise. Architects, civil engineers, water management specialists, and agricultural experts.
Perfect. Repeat this for retention. This secret alliance wasn't just about oil and spies. It built cities and fed people.
This secret alliance wasn't just about oil and spies. It built cities and fed people.
Now for the end of chapter mega recap on civil and economic interdependence.
The Shah's government saw Israel as a valuable partner for modernizing Iran's economy and infrastructure, leveraging Israeli technical expertise.
Collaboration was extensive across agriculture, irrigation, crop diversification, training, water management, urban water sewage systems, desalination, and industrial development.
Notable projects included the Kozvin Area Development Project and the planning and implementation of Tehran's entire sewage system by Israeli firms like Tahal.
Israeli companies like Solel Boneh participated in Iran's construction boom, building significant structures like the Tehran Hilton and housing complexes.
Iran was a major customer for Israeli industrial goods, while Iran's oil served as a resource and financing mechanism for this cooperation.
These deep civil and economic ties, often conducted via secret agreements and unofficial channels, abruptly ended with the 1979 revolution. Type continue for further detail. Okay, now let's drill down into one specific, truly monumental infrastructure project. Something that really came to symbolize this secret partnership, both its ambition and, well, its eventual demise. The Eilat-Ashkelon oil pipeline.
Yes, the sources describe this as one of the most significant joint projects rooted in the specific geopolitics of the mid-20th century Middle East.
It was basically conceived as a strategic workaround, wasn't it? To ensure oil supply security for Israel, export capacity for Iran, bypassing hostile Arab choke points.
Precisely. Circumventing Arab territories and the politically vulnerable Suez Canal. The idea of an overland oil route across Israel actually emerged very early on, right after independence.
As early as 4050, because Arab states were already blocking oil access.
Exactly. In 48, Arab forces sabotaged the old British Kirkuk-Haifa pipeline, and Egypt consistently barred Israeli-bound ships from Suez.
So after the 56 Suez crisis, Israel laid a smaller pipeline, 16-inch, Eilat to Ashdod.
They did, by 57-58. But it was in the mid-60s that the project materialized on a grand scale, specifically because of the clandestine cooperation with Iran.
By then, the Shah was willing to secretly supply oil, despite Arab opposition, and the 67 war closing the Suez Canal gave it real impetus.
A very strong, immediate, and mutual incentive for both sides. Create a large capacity, secure oil bridge from Iran across Israel onwards to Europe.
So in 1968, they formally agreed to jointly build and finance it. The Eilat-Ashkelon Pipeline Company, EAPC.
Established that year, yes. A 50-50 partnership. Iran's state oil company, NIOC, and Israel, its government, plus 3 fuel firms, Paz, Sonal, Delek.
This was high-level stuff. Golda Meir herself went to Tehran to negotiate.
She did, then foreign minister. Highlights the strategic importance at the very top in Israel. The final agreement, February 68, was kept top secret.
It created this jointly owned entity, sometimes called Transasiatic Oil Pipeline Co., with a 49-year operating contract.
And both sides went to extraordinary lengths to mask their involvement. Complex web of shell companies, Switzerland, elsewhere. The Israeli government imposed a strict confidentiality order, total secrecy.
Iran provided financing through guaranteed oil supplies, loans, and even had the right to appoint the company chairman.
Shows the depth of their involvement, yes. Despite the secrecy, construction moved incredibly fast. Pipeline laying started June 68, main line done in about a year. Rapid pace.
Let's talk technical details. How long, how big?
Roughly 254 kilometers, about 158 miles, a substantial 42 inches in diameter for high volume, running across Israel's Negev Desert, Red Sea to Mediterranean.
Southern end at Eilat on the Red Sea, where tankers from Iran unload.
Exactly. From there, powerful pumps push the oil northwest across the desert to the storage tanks and terminal at Ashkelon on the Mediterranean coast.
And from Ashkelon. Feeder lines to refineries, linking Red Sea to Mediterranean.
Effectively, yes. To Ashdod and Haifa refineries, a continuous pipeline link across the country.
Initial capacity, about 400,000 barrels per day. Flowing Eilat to Mediterranean.
Around 50 million tons a year, yes. Later upgrades allowed for reversal and higher capacity, but initially that was the flow.
So supertankers from Iran sail around Arabia, up the Red Sea to Eilat, unload.
Oil gets pumped across the desert to Ashkelon. From Ashkelon, it could be loaded onto other tankers for Europe or pumped north to Haifa for Israel's domestic needs.
First oil flowed December 69. By 1970, 162 tanker loads, nearly 10 million tons of Iranian crude via this route.
It was fully operational very quickly, and the economic and geopolitical impacts were enormous.
Dramatically reshaped Israel's energy situation.
Fundamentally. Provided Israel a secure, reliable petroleum source, insulated from Arab political pressure. Iran became Israel's undisputed main oil supplier, often selling quietly at premium prices when, as sources note, almost no one else would sell to Israel.
And Israel earned transit fees by acting as a bridge for Iranian oil to Europe.
Especially while Suez was closed 6775, it functioned as a vital energy bridge.
Strategically valuable for Iran too, an alternative export route, reduced dependence on the Persian Gulf route.
Exactly. Less vulnerable to Egyptian or Arab interference. Sources mention some European oil companies, even Romania, specifically chose to ship Iranian oil via the Israeli pipeline for reliability.
That indirect flow maybe muted Arab protests initially, since the end buyers weren't always Israel.
Possibly, though Arab governments certainly suspected the cooperation. But the pipeline proved critical during the 1973 war and the Arab oil embargo.
Iran didn't join the embargo and kept oil flowing to Israel via the pipeline.
Yes, the Shah famously argued oil shouldn't be a weapon. Iran continued critical supplies via clandestine channels like the Joint Pipeline Company. EAPC reportedly achieved record profits, maybe $20 million, in '73 as prices surged.
So it helped bypass the Arab boycott, mitigated its impact on Israel, even provided a backdoor for Iranian oil to global markets.
Significantly. But this secret lifeline, this close oil alliance, also had broader consequences. It definitely heightened resentment among Arab leaders.
Confirmed their suspicions about the Shah's pro-Western, pro-Israel leanings, made him seem unreliable to the pan-Arab cause.
Reinforced that view, yes. Egypt, under Sadat, responded by prioritizing its own alternative. The assumed pipeline, Suez Mediterranean, opened '77, partly to reduce reliance on the Israeli route.
So it spurred a kind of mini pipeline race, reflecting regional rivalries.
Increased options, but definitely reflected existing alignments. Within Israel, though, the guaranteed oil supply was fundamental. Fueled economic growth, allowed the IDF and industry to operate without shortages, even in crises.
And it reinforced that periphery doctrine, cementing ties between Israel and non-Arab Iran, altering Middle East power dynamics.
Throughout the '60s and '70s, yes.
Yeah.
Until the joint venture effectively ended with the Islamic Revolution in '79.
NIOC cut off oil deliveries, though didn't formally withdraw immediately.
Oil stopped flowing overnight. Israel was left in de facto control, had to scramble for new suppliers, Mexico, North Sea, others.
Iran lost its stake, and in '81 sued Israel for compensation, claiming 50% of assets, payments for oil.
Initiated a decades-long, complex, mostly secret arbitration battle. Still ongoing, really. Much of EAPC's operations remain classified in Israel due to this dispute.
International courts have ruled for Iran. Swiss Tribunal 2016, over $1 billion, but Israel hasn't paid.
Citing the state of war, counterclaims. The dispute persists. Despite all that, the physical pipeline continued operating under Israeli management, renamed Europe-Asia Pipeline.
Often repurposed to carry oil in reverse, Mediterranean to Red Sea.
For other international traders, yes. But its original legacy is significant. Epitomized Israel overcoming isolation via innovative secret partnerships. A fuel bridge countering the Arab boycott.
Its success until '79 showed the mutual benefits. Iran got export outlet revenue, Israel got energy independence.
And its collapse highlights shifting alliances, the impact of big projects on regional politics, economic security. It physically embodied the logic of the secret alliance until politics ended it.
Okay, another significant section covered. We've seen how the Suez Canal closure spurred this remarkable joint project, the Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline, funded and built in secret.
Providing a vital oil bridge for both nations, insulating Israel, giving Iran an alternative route.
It had major economic and geopolitical effects, especially during the '73 embargo, before its abrupt end in 1979, leading to that ongoing legal dispute. Right, review question. What was the primary strategic reason for building the Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline, and how did its operation benefit both Iran and Israel?
The primary strategic reason was to create a secure oil route bypassing Arab choke points like the Suez Canal, especially after its 1967 closure. It benefited Israel by providing a secure, reliable oil supply, insulating it from Arab boycotts, and generating transit revenue. It benefited Iran by giving it a secure, alternative export route to Mediterranean and European markets, reducing dependence on vulnerable Gulf shipping lanes.
Great. Visualize this for retention. A massive pipe crossing a desert, a secret river of oil connecting enemies.
A massive pipe crossing a desert. A secret river of oil connecting enemies.
Let's do the mega recap for the pipeline section.
The pipeline was conceived as a workaround to Arab blockades and the post-1967 Suez Canal closure, ensuring oil supply for Israel and export options for Iran.
It was a secret 50-50 joint venture, EAPC Transasiatic Oil, between Iranian and Israeli state fuel companies, masked by shell companies and secrecy orders.
Technically, the 254-kilometer 42-inch pipeline linked Eilat, Red Sea, to Ashkelon, Mediterranean, creating an overland bridge for oil.
Economically and geopolitically, it gave Israel secure energy, Iran became its main supplier, and transit fees, while giving Iran an alternative export route, proving vital during the '73 oil embargo.
The project spurred a pipeline race with Egypt's assumed line, cemented ties under the periphery doctrine, but its secrecy fueled Arab resentment.
The project effectively ended with the 1979 revolution, leading to Iran suing Israel for compensation in a dispute continuing today, though the pipeline itself remains operational under Israeli management. Type continue for further detail.
Okay, given everything we've discussed, the depth of the intelligence sharing, the military projects, the pipeline, understand the forces inside Iran that oppose this relationship, and how the Shah tried really hard to manage that dissent and maintain what the sources keep calling plausible deniability.
Yes, the sources make it abundantly clear. Despite these substantial ties, public sentiment and various domestic groups in Iran were deeply, often vehemently opposed throughout the entire Pahlavi era, 48 to 79.
And this wasn't just one group, it came from across the spectrum, across the board. Religious leaders, clergy, secular nationalists, leftist groups, students, intellectuals, they all denounced Zionism and the Shah's alignment with Israel, using sermons, fatwas, pamphlets, underground publications, whatever they could.
Let's start with the religious opposition. That seems particularly potent.
It was. Grand Ayatollah Abul Qasim Kashani back in the 40s and 50s was an early, very vocal opponent, saw Israel's creation as colonial aggression.
He organized mass protests in Tehran right after 48.
Estimated 30,000 gathered at one mosque, shows the deep initial public feeling. Kashani called Israel a colonial outpost, fiercely criticized the de facto recognition in 1950, reportedly declared fighting the Jews as compulsory.
And his agitation helped pressure Mossad to downgrade ties in 51.
Contributed significantly, yes.
Yeah.
Then there was Ayatollah Mahmoud Taleghani, 50-60s, strong supporter of the Palestinian cause, imprisoned repeatedly but spoke out when he could.
Like during the 67 war, he gave a sermon urging support for Palestinians, donated his zakat.
Dramatically held up money in the mosque, according to SAVAK reports. Inspired many others to donate their Islamic alms to Palestinians. SAVAK docs confirmed widespread public sympathy, indicating the depth of feeling the Shah's policies were running against.
Ayatollah Morteza Motahari, too. A leading scholar in the 60s, 70s, he collected donations after 67.
Collaborated with Taleghani. But by 1970, the Shah's government cracked down. SAVAK surveilled, detained Motahari, pressured him to stop raising money for Palestinians. He reportedly refused.
Shows how Palestine solidarity became linked to dissent against the Shah himself.
Directly. And of course the Shah's most famous opponent, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, consistently forcefully condemned Israel and the Pahlavi ties.
Portraying the Shah as a puppet of Israel and the U.S.
Betraying Iran and the Muslim world. After 67, he issued that fatwa. Relations with Israel, even buying Israeli goods, were haram, forbidden. Preached from exile that Israel was an enemy entrenched in Iran via the Shah. Later called Israel the Little Satan, but the anti-Zionist message was core to his revolutionary discourse early on.
Beyond the clergy, secular nationalists and intellectuals also objected.
Yes. Mossad, cutting ties in 51, reflected that nationalist view of Israel as an outpost of foreign influence. After the 53 coup silenced them domestically, some regrouped in exile.
In Beirut, forming connections with Palestinian activists, publishing papers promoting solidarity.
Keeping the issue alive among dissidents abroad.
Yeah.
And then there was Jalal Ali Ahmad, the prominent intellectual.
His views evolved. Visited Israel pre-67, wrote somewhat positively.
Yes, in Journey to the State of Israel, but 67 was a watershed. In a 68 addendum, he completely repudiated that, portrayed Israel as a tool of Western imperialism, a colonial venture, blasted Western intellectuals for hypocrisy.
His post-67 writings, like Garbzadegi, Westoxification, influenced a generation.
Profoundly, including figures like Ali Shariati.
Shariati, the key Islamic leftist ideologue, merging Shia thought with anti-imperialism, ardent supporter of Palestine.
Drew explicit parallels. Zionism equals colonialism, racism. Israel's oppression of Arabs, part of Western domination of Iran. Opposing Zionism was a religious, social, revolutionary duty. His lectures urged youth to see the Palestinian cause as linked to their own struggle against the Shah, helped frame solidarity as a moral imperative for student groups.
Student organizations abroad were also vocal. The Confederation of Iranian Students, strongly anti-imperialist, anti-Zionist.
From its start in 62, publications, protests condemned Shah's cooperation, expressed militant solidarity, even addressed Khomeini, praising clerical struggle against Zionism, colonialism, and internal repression. On campuses in Iran and abroad, leftists and Islamists often united on Palestine, organizing clandestinely.
Armed leftist groups, too, linking their fight against the Shah to Palestine. TUDA, the Communist Party.
Initially complex, but post-67, aligned with Soviet anti-Zionism. By the 70s, TUDA condemned Shah's subservience to Zionism as part of his alliance with U.S. imperialism.
The People's Mojahedin, MEK. left Islamist guerrillas saw the Israel alliance as a central pillar of the regime.
Vehemently anti-Shah. ME manifestos accused Iran of joining an axis of imperialist evil with Israel. Lambasted Zionism urged fighting world arrogance, the U.S., and its Zionist accomplice.
By 70, MEK had contacts with Arafat's Fatah, who trained MEK guerrillas.
Yes, dozens trained in Fatah camps in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. Some reportedly fought alongside Palestinians, cemented their ideological commitment.
Secular Marxist guerrillas, too, the Fedayeen, also identified with Palestine.
Strongly, formed after feeling nonviolent opposition failed. Small numbers trained with Palestinian Fedayeen, maybe 30 in PLO camps in Jordan late 60s, fought against Israeli troops.
Ali Akbar Safai Farahani, a communist leader close to Arafat, experienced his reinforced view of Israel as reactionary, provided propaganda against the Shah.
Exactly. Leftist underground journals romanticized Palestinian Fedayeen, mourned Iran's alleged support for Zionist oppression.
So opposition was widespread, deep, vehement Islamic solidarity, anti-colonial nationalism, Marxist anti-imperialism, all saw Palestine as linked to their struggle against the Shah.
Persistent criticism, strong public sympathy, created a volatile backdrop the Shah couldn't ignore, contributed significantly to the revolutionary fervor later.
Given all that opposition and the depth of the secret ties, the Shah had to employ sophisticated, sometimes brutal methods to manage it, maintain plausible deniability.
A very delicate balancing act. He valued the strategic cooperation, but knew overt friendship would provoke massive unrest, Arab backlash. His solution: secrecy, censorship, controlled messaging, and parallel displays of support for the Arab-Palestinian cause.
How did the secrecy work? Formally, no ambassadors exchanged?
Allowed him to publicly claim no official relations, only limited trade, reality. De facto embassies by late 50s, but no flags, vague titles like delegation, trade office, kept it low profile.
And censorship was key. That 1963 directive, keep all Iran-Israel contacts secret, stop news publication.
Explicit order. Followed domestic turmoil, June 63 protests, and regional uproar after the Shah publicly mentioned ties in 1960. Strict gag order after 63. State media simply didn't report Israeli visits, trade, military cooperation. Israel used sparingly, usually only in official condemnations.
SAVAK played a direct role in suppression, monitoring clerics, activists, shutting down pamphlets, gatherings.
Actively. By 1970, fundraising for Palestinians had to be covert. SAVAK arrested vocal supporters, like detaining Motahari for collecting donations, created a climate of fear. Criticizing the Shah's Israel policy was taboo, risked imprisonment, stifled open debate.
And the intel and military dealings were profoundly secret. Training, joint projects like Project Flower, public had no idea.
Completely out of view, Iranians didn't know about Israeli weapons purchases. Data emerged later showing millions paid for Israeli gear in 75, unreported. Secrecy let Shah publicly claim distance while cooperation continued.
He also cultivated an image of supporting the Palestinian cause, rhetorically.
Calculated use of propaganda, diplomacy, project solidarity while masking ties. Spoke at international forums about Palestinian rights, condemned occupation after 67, called for withdrawal, rights in Jerusalem.
Statements grew sharper in the early 70s, emphasizing Israeli intransigence. U.S. analysts saw this as a tactic.
To improve Iran's standing among Muslim countries without severing ties, echoing Arab positions reassured its population, neighbors.
Iran also joined the OIC, participated in summits.
Used these platforms. At the first Islamic summit, Rabat 69, Iran participated, subscribed to declarations demanding Israeli withdrawal, supporting Palestinian rights.
But worked behind scenes for moderate language. Since Iran, others had quiet ties.
Exactly. But participation bolstered plausible deniability. Iran could point to OIC membership, UN votes as proof of standing with Muslim brethren. Did it again at Lahore OIC Summit 74.
No PLO office allowed in Tehran, though. Symbolic support limited to token humanitarian efforts.
Donations to refugee relief, medical aid, trumpeted in state media to show concern. Propaganda highlighted Iran's boycott of Israeli fruit, Shah's messages of outrage, designed to assuage public opinion. Most Iranians heard about charity, not secret meetings, believed Shah's claims until protesters accused him of collusion late on. The 67 and 73 wars really tested this strategy, had to mask aid to Israel while publicly supporting Arabs.
Six-Day War 67, Iran officially sided with Arabs at UN, condemned strikes, allowed controlled protests but deployed security.
Yes. Behind doors, Shah helped Israel weather the Arab oil embargo, became crucial oil supplier via secret pipeline, third parties, used the oil companies' fig leaf, insisted Iran sold on open market, had no control if resold to Israel, communicated this to Arab governments, domestically unreported, Iranians unaware their country was Israel's oil lifeline, saw Shah offer moral support to Arabs, maintain the facade.
Yom Kippur War, 73. Even more delicate, Arab OPEC embargoed pro-Israel nations. Iran didn't join. Argued oil not a political weapon, enjoyed higher prices.
And evidence shows Iran continued critical oil supplies via clandestine channels, like the Trans-Asiatic Oil Company. Simultaneously placated Iranians by aiding Arab war effort. Quietly sent 600,000 tons oil to Egypt, Sadat request. Early 74. $120 remit aid to Egypt, credit for reconstruction. Promised $150 to Syria.
These moves publicized to show brotherly support. Had it both ways.
Covertly aiding Israel, oil, overtly bolstering Arab credentials, aid. U.S. intel noted his sitting on the fence, keeping ties low-key to avoid antagonizing Arabs, minimizing domestic pro-Arab protests.
Regime-calibrated public narrative. Newspapers highlighted Shah's peace appeals, portrayed him as mediator.
Cautiously floated Iran as mediator. Boosted his image domestically, obscured pro-Israel tilt, much later known. El Al flights landed regularly, Israeli advisors present. Facts kept out of discourse, post-revolution revelations. 100 Israeli advisors' texts still in Iran during 78 upheavals hidden near Tehran. Secrecy effective for a long time. U.S. and Israeli observations confirmed Shah's management of optics. 75 U.S. intel brief. As Shah improved Arab ties, Iran's Israeli connection becomes an increasing liability, downplayed at all costs. Shah condemned Israeli occupation, sharpened public support for Arabs to counter suspicions. Private, U.S. recognized use of anti-Israel statements for cover while maintaining alliance substance.
U.S. report. Shah sought to sit on the fence, kept ties low-key to avoid provoking Arab neighbors or domestic pro-Arab factions. Plausible deniability encapsulated.
Israeli side, aware of Shah's tightrope, valued alliance, main oil supplier, back channel. Understood discretion needed. Diplomats in Tehran careful. That 68 Asian Cup incident, hostile fans versus Israeli team, reminded both friendship must stay in shatters.
Israeli archives later showed officials knew about Shah's murderous suppression of political opponents,
Yeah.
knew he was silencing anti-Zionist dissenters, relied on his control.
Tacitly relied on it, yes. So dual policy, intimate cooperation in practice, strict denial in public, censored press, muted acknowledgement, cracked down on dissent, invested in public image supporting Palestinian rights, carefully constructed ambiguity allowed benefits, oil, weapons, intel, while minimizing outrage.
But by late 70s, balancing act fraying. Revolutionary movement castigated secret ties.
Became a potent symbol of regime's alleged corruption, subservience. Revolution 1979 exposed severed ties, closed Israeli mission, gave to PLO, declared Israel enemy of Islam. Covert alliance ended in indignation suppressed for decades.
Okay, let's wrap up that section. We've explored the deep well of opposition to the Shah's ties with Israel, from religious figures, nationalists, intellectuals, leftists.
And detailed the Shah's sophisticated methods, censorship, like the 63 media blackout, secret diplomacy, propaganda supporting Palestinian rights, and that careful balancing act during regional wars, all to keep the relationship hidden and maintain plausible deniability.
Review question. Describe one specific tactic the Shah used to maintain plausible deniability regarding Iran's secret relationship with Israel.
One key tactic was maintaining only de facto, not de jure, recognition, meaning no formal exchange of ambassadors or embassies with flags. This allowed him to publicly claim no official relations. Another was the strict media censorship imposed from 1963, preventing reporting on Israeli contacts or cooperation. A third was his public posturing condemning Israeli actions at the UN or OIC while continuing secret cooperation.
Got it. Think of it like this for retention, a political stage play where the public saw one performance while the real drama happened backstage.
And the political stage play where the public saw one performance while the real drama happened backstage.
And the final mega recap for domestic opposition and plausible deniability.
Iranian domestic opposition to ties with Israel was widespread and intense, rooted in religious, nationalist, intellectual, and leftist ideologies, viewing the relationship as a betrayal.
Key figures like Ayatollahs Kashani, Talagani, Motahari, and Khomeini, nationalist leaders, and leftist guerrilla groups like the MEK actively condemned the alliance and supported the Palestinian cause.
The Shah employed a deliberate policy of secrecy and censorship, for example, the 1963 media blackout, to prevent public knowledge of the extensive ties.
SAVAK played a direct role in monitoring and repressing those who spoke out against Iran's relationship with Israel or supported Palestinians.
The Shah maintained a public posture of support for Palestinian rights, participating in Islamic conferences and offering symbolic aid to create plausible deniability and manage opinion.
During regional crises like the 1967 and 1973 wars, the Shah carefully balanced secret assistance to Israel, like oil, with overt gestures of support for Arab nations, though this became increasingly difficult.
Despite the Shah's efforts, the secret relationship fueled domestic opposition, contributing to the revolutionary fervor that ultimately exposed and ended the alliance in 1979. Type continue for further detail.
So what does all of this mean? When we reflect on the secret alliance between Iran and Israel from 48 to 79, it really reveals a history that's dramatically, almost jarringly different from the open animosity we see today.
It really does. These sources clearly demonstrate the remarkable strategic depth and, frankly, the complexity of this covert relationship. As we've unpacked, it wasn't just some superficial arrangement.
No, not at all. It went into vital, sensitive areas, deep intelligence sharing, significant military cooperation, including joint weapons development, substantial economic interdependence, and major infrastructure like that pipeline.
It was a prime example of realpolitik in action, wasn't it? On a massive scale. National interests containing the Soviets, countering radical Arab nationalism, seeking concrete economic and security benefits, consistently trumped the ideological, religious, or historical differences that might otherwise have kept them apart.
And the abrupt, total shift after the 79 Iranian Revolution, it's such a stark illustration of how quickly geopolitical alignments can just flip, especially with a regime change driven by a powerful, opposing ideology.
Right, the fall of the Shah, the rise of the Islamic Republic, it viewed Israel through a diametrically opposed lens. Implacable hostility. It instantly severed decades of carefully managed cooperation, replacing that secret partnership with the open entity we still see.
And understanding this history, it isn't just, historical curiosity. It offers important insights for thinking about contemporary geopolitics, wouldn't you say?
It reminds us that alliances aren't always visible. The most significant connections can operate for decades, largely in the shadows, driven by pragmatic needs, not public declarations.
It underscores that pragmatism, shared threats, can forge unexpected, surprisingly deep bonds between nations with very different cultures, religions, governments.
And it highlights the power of domestic politics, even when suppressed. As we saw with the Shah's Balancing Act, internal opposition, especially when linked to potent issues like Palestine, can ultimately have profound, even revolutionary impacts on international relations and long-standing partnerships.
The story of this secret alliance really underscores the complexity, the fluidity of forces shaping the Middle East. And it's a powerful reminder of how the shadows of past relationships and their abrupt ends can continue to influence present-day realities and tensions.
It's a history that compels us to look beyond today's headlines, understand the deeper, sometimes hidden roots of regional dynamics, and how seemingly impossible alliances can emerge, function, and then collapse.
Uncovering this hidden history of cooperation between Iran and Israel under the Shah. It really is a story of strategic necessity, mutual benefit, and that carefully maintained facade of public distance that, in the end, couldn't withstand the forces of revolution.
And understanding this period isn't just about the past. It sheds critical light on the roots of current tensions and reminds us that relationships between nations are rarely simple, rarely static, rarely purely ideological.
So here's something for you to mull over as we finish. How might the enduring legacy of the infrastructure built like that pipeline, or the water systems, the technical knowledge shared, maybe even the human connections forged during this secret alliance, despite decades of official animosity, how might all that still quietly influence the region today in ways we might not immediately see or even realize?
Between 1948 and 1979, Israel and Iran weren't friends. They were strategic mirrors, partners in survival, moving beneath the surface. And when that surface shattered, the silence ended. The oil stopped flowing, the files were sealed, and a new era began. One defined not by covert cooperation, but by ideology, enmity, and erasure. It ends where it began, with power reshaped by perception, law eclipsed by leverage, and memory weaponized for the next conflict.
Please like and subscribe.